Brazil had just suffered the greatest defeat in its football history. Nearly 200,000 people had entered the Maracanã Stadium expecting to celebrate. Instead, they left in silence. For millions of Brazilians, the pain of losing the 1950 World Cup never truly disappeared. But inside one modest home, that heartbreaking afternoon became something else. It became the beginning of a promise. According to the story Pele would later tell, he watched his father sitting quietly after Brazil's defeat. His father, João Ramos do Nascimento, better known as Dondinho, had dreamed of becoming a great footballer himself. A talented striker, Dondinho's own career had been limited by injury. Now, as Brazil's greatest football dream had collapsed, he couldn't hold back his tears. His young son had never seen him cry before. The little boy looked at his father and made a promise. "Don't cry, Dad. One day, I'll win the World Cup for Brazil." At the time, it sounded like nothing more than the dream of a little boy. But 8 years later, the entire world would know his name. Not as Edson, not as Deco, but as Pele. Pele was born on October 23, 1940, in the small Brazilian town of Três Coracoes. His parents named him Edson, after the famous inventor Thomas Edison. But at home, everyone simply called him Deco. Life was anything but easy. Money was scarce. His family often struggled to afford even the basic necessities. As a boy, Deco polished shoes to earn a little money. Sometimes, there wasn't even a proper football to play with. So he and his friends became creative. They rolled up old socks, stuffed newspapers together, tied pieces of cloth into a ball. Sometimes they even kicked around a grapefruit. For Deco, the object didn't matter. If it rolled, it became football. His father noticed something unusual. Deco wasn't simply enjoying the game. He understood it. Dondinho became his first coach. He taught him how to control the ball, how to finish calmly, how to think before acting. Most importantly, he taught him to love football. The father who had never fulfilled his own dream quietly began helping his son chase one. Neither of them could have imagined just how far that dream would go. As Deco grew older, people began talking about the skinny teenager with extraordinary skill. He played without fear, without hesitation, without looking impressed by older players. Every match seemed to reveal something new. A clever touch, an impossible dribble, a finish that looked effortless. Word spread quickly. Soon, one of Brazil's biggest clubs came calling. Santos FC. He was only 15 years old. Imagine that. While most teenagers were still in school, Pele was already beginning his professional football career. His teammates immediately noticed something different. Even experienced professionals struggled to stop him in training. The skinny 15-year-old dribbled past established players as though he already belonged among them. People began asking the same question. Who was this boy? They did not yet know what he would become, but they knew they were watching someone unusual. From that moment, everything happened quickly. Goals came almost every week. Crowds grew larger. Newspapers began writing about the teenage sensation. Before long, Brazil's national team selectors faced an extraordinary decision. The next World Cup would take place in Sweden. Could they really trust a teenager on football's biggest stage? Many believed he was simply too young, too inexperienced, too small. Then, just before the tournament, disaster struck. Pele suffered a knee injury. Suddenly, the dream of representing Brazil at the World Cup seemed to be slipping away. He traveled with the squad, but there was no guarantee he would ever step onto the pitch. Many doubted he would play at all. For the first 2 matches, he watched from the sidelines, waiting, hoping, wondering if his chance had already passed. Everything changed in Brazil's 3rd match. Finally, the coaches decided it was time. The 17-year-old would finally play. His World Cup debut came in Brazil's final group stage match against the Soviet Union. Brazil won, but the world had only seen a glimpse of what was coming. In the quarterfinal, Brazil faced Wales. For over an hour, neither team could find a breakthrough. The tension grew with every passing minute. Then, the ball found the young forward inside the penalty area. With remarkable composure, he controlled Didi's header with his chest, flicked the ball beyond the defender, and fired the bouncing ball into the bottom corner of the net. It was the only goal of the match. Brazil were through. Pele had scored his very first World Cup goal. He was just 17 years old. If the goal against Wales announced his arrival, the next match introduced him to the world. Brazil faced France in the semi-final. France had one of the most dangerous attacking teams in the tournament. Led by the brilliant Just Fontaine, many expected Brazil to struggle. Instead, the teenager produced one of the greatest performances the World Cup had ever seen. Pele scored. Once. Then again. Then a third time. A World Cup semi-final. A hat-trick. At just 17, Brazil won 5-2. Suddenly, the little boy from Três Corações had become the biggest story in world football. Only one match remained. The World Cup final. Brazil against the host nation, Sweden. Things could not have started worse. Sweden scored first. For a moment, it felt as though Brazil's nightmare from 8 years earlier might return. But this Brazil team was different. They refused to panic. They equalized, then took the lead. And then, the teenager took over once more. One of Pele's goals remains one of the most famous in football history. He controlled the ball, lifted it gracefully over a defender, and volleyed it into the net before it touched the ground. It wasn't just a goal. It was a statement. The world had just met its next football king. When the final whistle blew, Brazil had won 5-2. For the first time in history, Brazil were world champions. The celebration swept across an entire nation. 8 years earlier, Brazil had cried together. Now, they celebrated together. And somewhere in the middle of it all, was a 17-year-old who could barely believe what had happened. The emotion overwhelmed him. Pele collapsed to the ground in tears. His teammates gathered around him. Not because he was already the greatest player in the world, but because everyone knew they had witnessed the birth of someone extraordinary. According to the story Pele would later share, the promise he made as a little boy had finally been fulfilled. The father who once wept after Brazil's greatest heartbreak now watched his son lift the trophy that healed an entire nation. Whether every word of that childhood conversation happened exactly as remembered or not, its meaning has endured for generations. Sometimes, the stories we tell become part of a nation's identity, and this became one of football's most treasured stories. Pele would go on to win 3 World Cups, a record that still stands today. He would be credited with more than 1,000 goals across official and exhibition matches, inspire millions of children, transform Santos into a global club, and help make football the world's game. But perhaps, his greatest achievement wasn't the goals, or the trophies, or even the records. It was proving that even a nation's greatest heartbreak could become the beginning of its greatest triumph. Because sometimes, history doesn't end with heartbreak. Sometimes, heartbreak becomes the beginning of something even greater. In 1950, Brazil lost a World Cup. But in one small home, a little boy made a promise. 8 years later, he kept it. And from that day on, the world would never forget the name, Pele.